Today's guest is Brian Chidester. He's the head of industry strategy for public sector at Adobe. Brian is also the host of the Government Huddle podcast, which we'll put links in the description so you can find that podcast. It's very interesting. I've listened to a bunch of episodes. He's also an advisor at the G20 Global Smart City Alliance. I'm sure he'll talk a bit more about that. And Brian, thank you so much for joining me today.
And it's an absolute pleasure. I'm really excited to get into this, Jeremy.
So for those who have never met you, talk a bit about yourself. Where are you from? What do you do? Who are you as a person? Talk about your background.
Yeah, so where I'm from, I was originally born in upstate New York. I lived in Charlotte for a little while, but it's pretty boring. I'm really from the DC area for the most part. I've lived here since I was in third grade. We're talking about my career a little bit, and I'm in the government technology space, but I sort of grew up in this area. My dad, who's now SES within the U.S. Department of Transportation, he obviously career Govy, and just kind of saw that. I also fell in love with government when I was in school, and that kind of brought me into the career I have today, I guess. I tell people I love government. I hate politics. So I love getting into the inner workings of things. I'm a big history buff. But yeah, I wish I could say there was more interesting stuff there, but just grew up in the DC area. And then I always say, you can appreciate this too, I'm sure. If you live in the DC area, you either work for the government or you do business with the government. And I sort of coalesced my love of marketing that I kind of gained in college, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but coalesced that with my love of government. And then as I matriculated across my career, got deeper into strategy and the title of your podcast, I sort of geeked out in that area. And that's sort of how I got to where I am today.
So when you roll back the clock and you think about as you're coming out of high school, how did you know what you wanted to do?
Man, I didn't. I wanted to be a sportscaster when I was starting in like 7th and 8th grade. I remember they had like the shadow day where you get to go shadow somebody, and a lot of people would shadow their parents. I remember I reached out to the sportscaster at the DC ABC7 affiliate, and I got the lead sportscaster. I had to shadow him for a day, and it was incredible. I loved it.
Wow.
And I was always really deep into sports. So that's kind of where I wanted to go. But my real love was soccer. So I played a lot of sports in high school. But soccer was the one that I really got deep into, and got a scholarship to play Division I college soccer at Liberty University. And I got a bunch of offers to a lot of different places. I actually went to Virginia Military Institute my freshman year, transferred to Liberty. But that's sort of where I kind of started to figure out what I wanted to do. I mentioned that I found this love of marketing and communications and conversation and talking to people and propagating opinions and all of that. And I just honed that in. I think after I graduated, I actually played a year of professional soccer, and then I had some opportunities and just decided I want to start my career. I want to kind of dive into this marketing thing, and never look back. I think for everyone listening and you, I'm sure, can understand, like, careers are never as linear as you would expect them to be when you're 22. And I remember I started out when I was 18 thinking, or 22 when I was thinking, man, I want to be a CMO someday. And it's my career's sort of matriculated in different ways. And now that's not where I want to get to. And I have different goals and aspirations for myself. And I'm really loving being able to dive deep with some of the people we work with, really get to learn more. I think that's the other thing too. I really have this, like, I love this understanding and deeper understanding of different topics, and bringing my own opinions onto those topics, and bringing in wide varieties of different expertise, right? Mm-hmm. Into various topics. And it's just, for me, where I am in my career right now, it's just the absolute best. I'm loving exactly what I'm doing. I have no regrets. I made the right decisions when I made those decisions, and I'm looking forward to kind of moving forward.
So how did that first job come about? You said you did professional soccer for a year, which is pretty amazing. Is it a team we'd all know?
It's in Richmond, Virginia, Richmond Kickers.
Okay.
So yeah, in the United Soccer League.
Yeah, yeah. So then as you came to decide you wanted to get into a different type of work, get away from the sports, how did you find that first role?
So I found that first role was in college actually, and I was sort of doing both things, and had an opportunity where I could have gone overseas and had they call them trials, basically tryouts, and you go play with a team for a couple of weeks, and they decide do we want to keep you or not. And so I had an opportunity. I had two trial opportunities over in the Irish Premier League, and I also had this job and this career that was starting to pick up, and I was getting really excited and interested about things. And I just decided, you know what, I want to dive into my career. And that job came about. I still remember it. My best friend still is my best friend to this day. He and I were making a road trip down to Atlanta. So Liberty University is in Lynchburg, Virginia. This was the spring of my senior year. We were making a road trip down to Atlanta. And I had interviewed a couple times with this company, and just got a call while we were driving down that I got the role, and was super excited. Made for a very good weekend, and really just never looked back. But I think that sort of personifies my personality. There were a lot of people that I was friends with that were they were going to graduate and they were going to wait to see what the summer brought, and they were going to apply for some jobs. But I never like to leave things to chance, and I always want to have things to do. And I didn't want to leave college and not have whatever that next purpose was going to be. And I started applying to roles and interviewing for roles starting around winter break of my senior year. And that's, I think, very much how I've approached most things, where I want to make sure that I'm always having that purpose, and it's always me controlling whatever that purpose is. And it hasn't served me poorly yet.
Now, did you do any internships as well during school?
I did. I was really fortunate. So there's a company, a global company called Ariva, that actually had a big office in Lynchburg, and was able to work with them on an internship during my junior year. I never really felt like I got. I never really felt like I got the experience that really has provided value to me throughout my career, but I still think giving that diversity of experience is still good. Sure. If I had to do it over again, I might have reached out. I sort of took an easier path because we had the opportunity to take it if we wanted to. But I still think, like I said, I think all experiences are good experiences. You have to take from them what you can. And I definitely did, but I probably could have diversified myself a little bit there.
Yeah, it's always interesting. I raised that question because as you mentioned, you went straight into looking for a place to work. Yep. You hear a lot about students who graduate, they go, hey, I'm going to take a year off, I'm going to go backpack Europe. And I think what they don't think about, and don't get me wrong, that would be a great experience. I would love to do something like that. Well, if I was going back, I would love to do something like that. But at the same time, you've also then disconnected yourself from that network that school provided you for finding jobs, right? And that freshness of coming right out of school, where you've been doing the course of study, and then you go right into doing work, sometimes based on the course of study, sometimes not, right? So it's very interesting in the corporate world how many roles don't align with what you learn in school.
Well, I'll tell people, one, the freshness is great, but being naive it can be a superpower, right?
Yes.
And you go into it and you don't know what you don't know, which is great because you just feel like I'm going to go get all these jobs. And you have all this energy. But two, I regularly tell people when I graduated, when I was in college, social media didn't even exist.
Right.
So, to be able to, and I think people listening again will agree with this, to be able to survive in this field, you have to have a growth mindset. You have to continue to adapt. Mm-hmm. And I went from literally Facebook was something that was rolling out to some colleges and it hadn't even reached my university yet. That's where we were on the social media spectrum. And think of how it's matriculated over the course of 20 years. And it's a completely different environment and ecosystem. And if you don't learn and grow and understand all those things and the ways you can harness them for good, all the different potential downfalls and pitfalls of it, and everything in between, you're really just going to sink, right? So I think that's just one example of a million different things. We look at the proliferation, I mean, vertical and horizontal proliferation of artificial intelligence right now. And if you're not keeping up with that technology, you're going to be left in the dust. And it's not like you have a couple of years to learn. You have weeks and months to learn to make sure you're continuing on with kind of the value that it can bring. So I think that really, as I've progressed in my career, that's something I've really tried to make sure was really a top priority for me, was to continue to grow. And I try to take inspiration from all different places. I mean, you can have a plan where you want to grow, but I also think you have to be open to making sure that you are letting in the things that want to teach you something. And I've certainly tried to do that.
Yeah, I was just having a conversation today with somebody who's interning at our agency, and that's an exact message I gave them. Sure, your college program is great. It's prepping you for a job within information technology, but your learning's never going to stop. And so, you know, there must be like 20 bookmarks I have to key websites that I've always going to say, okay, do they got a new article talking about whatever's coming next? Or do they have a new position on something or a new use case for something that I never considered before? And I think those information, you know, gathering efforts are critical to building your career and making sure you stay relevant.
You can tell me if you found this, Jeremy. I've taken certain things for granted throughout my career, and more often than not, sometimes I've been proven wrong. And one of them is I sort of take for granted that most people understand that, and they have that growth mindset, and they're always looking to learn. And what I found is it's actually not the case. I mean, you run into people that are just happy where they are in their comfort zone, and for some that's great and that's fine. But I think I just always assume that people are constantly trying to digest information and learn and grow and do those things. And that certainly isn't always the case. I mean, sometimes they really need that direction to say, hey, we should probably kind of advance in this area, and let's take on some new skills so we can keep up with X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, I don't think it's as prevalent as you or I might have felt when we were coming up through the ranks. And I don't know if that's because there's such an information overload, or because, you know, we didn't have the internet to do searches on things. And so we had to learn it, know it, at least have some idea of where to go to learn more information about it. I think it's so easy to find information now that it's almost, in some cases, people don't even go consume it.
What's a different skill set, right? Yeah. I mean, so my wife's a STEM educator, and she talks about this all the time, where you really have to be a critical thinker. And yes, the information is going to be out there, but are you asking the right questions? Yes, you can say, oh, well, that information is going to be there, I don't need to do this. But do you know how to get to that information? And that's that critical thinking aspect of kind of what needs to be kind of taught and honed and strengthened, that to me is going to really differentiate the next generation of workers.
Makes complete sense. So now, as you were moving from that first job and starting to craft your career, right, started to get a better understanding of what it was to work in marketing and what that meant, what were some of the key transition points you made in terms of like what you wanted to get involved with or companies you want to work for? Did that come into your thought pattern, or were they, once again, you know, opportunities that just kind of opened themselves up and you took advantage of them?
Yeah, I think probably a little bit of both. I think back now, and some, like, I don't know if you listen to Jay Shetty. I love listening to Jay Shetty. And somebody asked him one time what the best piece of advice was that he had ever gotten. And he said, walk through every door that opens up for you, walk through it. If it stays open, keep going. If it closes, move on to the next one, but take every opportunity. And in hindsight, I look back, and that's not something anybody ever told me, but I'd like to think that's sort of what I tried to do through my career. Is as there was an opportunity, I tried to walk through each door and experience that and stay open to it, whether it was inside an organization, outside an organization. And I feel like that's done a good job of not just showing me what I want to do, but also what I don't want to do, right? It's one of the ways that I sort of learned that marketing isn't necessarily exactly what I want to do. Like there's attributes of it that go into my job, but really what I want to be able to do is a lot of different things. And I want to be a strategic leader in those areas. And I couldn't have done that if I hadn't walked through a bunch of different doors that I never would have anticipated I would have at the very beginning of my career. So to me, that's been a huge value. And I'm grateful for the people that have opened some of those doors for me too. I mean, there's some that I've opened for myself, and there's others that other people have opened for me. And I don't think anyone's career is just them. I think there's a lot of people that contribute to it. I'm where I am on the backs of a lot of different people and the mentorship of a lot of different people that I'm grateful for. And I also try to continue to build that ecosystem. So yeah, I think just taking advantage of the opportunities that present themselves, but also not being so reactive that you're not trying to manufacture some of those too for yourself, by looking to see kind of where things are going and what you're interested in and how you want to get involved. That's been a really important kind of trademark, I think, across my career.
And then, as I mentioned in your introduction, you get involved with external things, external from the company, right? So, for instance, the G20. How did something like that come about?
So I was at OpenText, and we did a lot of work with smart cities, and in doing that, it's connected me to a lot of different people, and just got pulled in that way. I mean, at first I saw it as being advantageous to my job, but as I continued to evolve those relationships and work within that group, I found a lot of value in it. But I also love the work, and I'll give you an example. Just recently, within the past year, have been working with the country of Ukraine and the city of Kiev as they've been advancing their smart city initiatives in defense of Russian aggression. So they're trying to figure out how to envelop technology and strategy to support their citizens of some of their major cities as this war is happening. And programs like that, that's not something you get to do in the private sector, right? That's very specific to public sector, where you're helping people. And this specific one is literally a matter of life and death. So I've loved it. I've taken a lot from it, not just relationships, and not even just insights, but also just the value that you get from working for people that are really helping them, truly helping them. That's been one of the reasons why I've loved getting into some of these extracurriculars, just outside of my day to day.
Yeah, I heartily agree that for those of us who have the time, right, have the ability or the desire, it can make you even more well-rounded within your job, right? Because now you have this broader perspective of the world, these things that may not completely relate to your job, but there's skills that you're picking up that now you can leverage in your job that you may not have had before, ways of thinking, new ways of thinking. And then, of course, the amazing, it's smart people that you end up interacting with that they're always smarter than you. You're wondering why in the world are they including me? But yet somehow it's a nice symbiosis that there's value that's produced all around.
And I always get very worried if I'm in a room and I'm not thinking that. If I'm ever not thinking, why are they involving me? There's a lot of smart people here, then I'm probably in the wrong room. Right. I want to get into a room where I feel like I need to step up my game and keep up and continue to learn. That's usually been a good rule of thumb for me too. It's one of the only reasons I've continued to grow, is getting around really smart people.
So what was the genesis for starting the podcast?
So somebody reached out to me. This was back in very early 2020. I say it's fortuitous. I don't mean to use that word in relation to the pandemic, but it was fortuitous that things went remote the way they did, because I started the podcast. The first episode was actually in April, but started the planning of it in January of that year. And really the idea was to provide content, insights, information to a group that I felt like really needed to get more proactive and involved. It started off really targeting and working with marketers in that way. And I always saw marketers as having this great opportunity, but most of them not really stepping up to that opportunity. right? They would sit there and they would sort of take insights from other people and they'd go do with it what they can. And I'll work with this person, they'll help me build content, or I'll wait for a salesperson to tell me what it is we need to do, and then I'll go do it. And I really thought that the insights that you can gain from some of these really smart leaders in the space, from industry and government, can really help you be more proactive and be a much more efficient tool in the tool belt of your organization. So that was sort of the impetus, and it's even matriculated now where I look to just educate the entire market on all the different insights happening out there. Also introducing them to some great people, which is one of the reasons why I love your podcast, is you're really introducing people that they might think they know, but they don't really know, and humanizing those individuals, I think is great. And I've tried to do some of that with my podcast too, but I really look at it as sitting at the intersection of leadership and government transformation, and kind of trying to cover a lot of different broad topics, get smarter on technology, but also get smarter on how do you lead teams? How do you actually get to mission success, leveraging technology, leveraging people across all different theaters, all different spectrums. So that's kind of the idea of the podcast itself. And really the thing that I love the most is exactly what I was saying before, is I get to be on kind of get a front row seat to some really smart individuals where I can learn and grow and ask the questions that I would want somebody to ask. And that for me has been the greatest reward of the podcast itself.
I mean, I connect with that for sure. I started my podcast around the same time you did. It's same reason, right? Here we are now in COVID. It was, like you said, fortuitous in that now I'm connecting with people in a way that I couldn't connect with them in person. And even the bits of time I have that are not in the recording whatsoever are seriously beneficial to myself and building a connection with other people and meeting smart people. And I am always stunned when smart people agree to come on my podcast. I personally never think it is a big deal. I love doing it for me, but yet I'll go someplace, I'll learn something crazy. Like somebody I never would have thought of is listening to my podcast. And I'm like, what? Wow. Who are you? And why are you listening to it? What brought you to it? And it's a great feeling.
That's awesome. So let me ask you this: what brought you to listening to my podcast? Because I'm grateful that you listen to some episodes.
Yeah, well, I mean, I pay attention in the GovCon space, right? I work for the government. I participate heavily in the DC area in nonprofits that bring government and industry together. Big proponent of trying to solve problems in whatever way possible. And your podcast kind of bubbled up as one of those that was focused in the same space I'm in, and had some guests that I had not met before and some really interesting topics. So I think all of us have unique perspectives. There's a number of them in the DC area that I've started to listen to because, and we don't want to repeat as well, right? So we make sure we understand who else is doing what out there, so we're all adding value to the spectrum collectively. So yeah, I mean, mine is more interview on somebody's career. Yours, I like the topic-based approach. I like some of the topics you've tackled, and they continue to add value in thoughts that I had not considered before. And that's the great thing about podcasts in general.
Well, I appreciate it, honestly. And the thing that I noticed is all the podcasts at the time were really these very specific to like news, right? The news
Yes.
happened the day before. We're going to spend 15 minutes and talk about it. And it really didn't get into the people. It didn't get into like the human element of things that happened. I mentioned earlier on too that I'm a big history buff. I love history. And that's the thing that attracted me to history, was really the human element of everything that was going on at the time and kind of how it was impacting the everyday person. And that I try to bring a little bit of that human element into what I'm doing to make it unique. And that's one of the reasons why I love yours, is you really get to the heart of people, which I think is fantastic. And it's just a different way to approach content in this market. I absolutely love it.
I appreciate that. And on that note, then that gives me the big content question. Looking back at your career, what's something that, or more than one thing, if you have them, what's something that you look at and go, man, I wish that we did that differently in our industry? And I'll caveat that to give you kind of an out to say we don't have to solve that problem today. It could be too big to solve, but certainly probably something that's worth mentioning and thinking about.
Well, I mean, I always like to bring problems I don't have to have the answers for. So that's fantastic. Um, I think that's really interesting. There's probably a lot of different ways that I can go. I feel like up until recently, and I think it was in I think in large part, but at bare minimum, the pandemic really brought together the private sector and the public sector more than they'd ever been. And the thing that I wish is that that had happened earlier. The partnerships between the two that were forged during the pandemic, purely out of draconian necessity, I think have really flourished afterwards. I think there was a level of distrust there for various reasons. I mean, private sector organizations have a bottom line, right?
Yeah.
And they need to make money. But I think the people that work in this sector, even on the private sector side, they're not just in it for that. They're in it for mission, service. Most of the people that I've interviewed on my podcast, government side, private sector alike, have brought that unique perspective. They either had a parent or someone in their family or a friend that has influenced them to go into public service, and they're doing it either on the outside or the inside. And that's one of the things I love about the community. And I think that was something that was really exposed during the pandemic was private sector organizations just wanted to help. They wanted to jump in and find a place to help. And I think that trust and that bond sort of brought the two factions closer. And I think now we've done so much more by bringing those two groups together that I look at it and say, I just wish that had happened earlier, right? So I mean, that would probably be my answer. Like I said, I wouldn't have had the answer for it then. And I think maybe it needed to take a global pandemic, an emergency to do that. But now that I feel like they have come together a little bit more, I'm excited to see the type of progression that'll happen within our industry at large.
That's a very interesting thought. I would say when I got into government contracting before I worked in government, it was many years ago, over 20 years ago. I would say there was a much more adversarial relationship with industry and government on contracts and in between contracts and trying to win contracts. And or maybe, you know, and some of that could be just the circles I ran in at the time, and now I'm running in better circles. But I would say you're right. The pandemic, in my experience as on the government side, there were a lot of really great solutions brought to help government figure out how to tackle that at the same time that companies tackling it for themselves, right? We all had to quickly go, oh, this is a new world, and we need to be able to connect remotely better than we ever have before. And some agencies were already ready for it, and a lot of agencies were not. And so that partnership was very important. That's a really great point.
Well, and something you said too about running in better circles, I think I know you're being a little bit tongue in cheek, but I think that speaks to what we've seen a little bit around private sector individuals going into public sector and vice versa. I think there's been much more of a willingness to get into the space, and I think for a long time the narrative had been private sector individuals go into public sector so they can finally help them, right? And they can help government understand how to do things. And in my opinion, I think it's the people that have gone from public sector, private sector, that have really helped the most. Because finally there's people that can say, no, this is really how we can get it done, right? One of my favorite books is Hack Your Bureaucracy. And I love Marina Nitsa. And it's one of the things that I think she kind of speaks to, in that is there's a bureaucracy for a reason. And for a long time, people in the private sector would just throw four-letter word after four-letter word at the fact that I just can't get through. And when there was finally that kind of commiseration around, well, there's a reason why it's there. But there's a way to navigate it in the right way, and we can make change, and we can work with them, and we can do it together. And that mindset finally got brought in. I think that has driven a lot of change. So I think people, just like, I mean, unsurprisingly, people tend to be the answer, right? It boils down to people, not technology. And I think that's one very big example of where people have sort of changed the entire landscape of government contracting, government technology for the better.
I would agree. I would even go so far to say if I had a magic wand, I would say every industry executive should do a stint in government and every government person should do a stint in industry. And I think if we both better understand the equation, there's the profit model, there's the delivery model, and then there's the get the mission accomplished model, and we understood how they could complement one each other better, then all those problems would go away.
Oh, I think that's a great point. Absolutely, totally agree.
And when I was in DoD had many, many years ago, DoD actually had programs for government personnel to transition and work for a corporation for a year, like on a kind of like a work study program,
Yeah.
and then come back into their regular job and bring that experience of going and working in IT. I think I saw a bunch of people go to Cisco or some of those, large integrator companies and go work with them for a year. And then while they're there, they can share some insights into how government thinks. And then when they come back, they can share some insights in how the industry thinks. I don't see those programs very often anymore. I wish we did more of those.
No, I mean they've done some work. It's been seemingly more at the SES level,
Yeah.
right? Where they have some of those, let's call them like work study programs. And I call them deployments sometimes, where people will come in from the outside. But it's been more at the SES level and not necessarily at the GS or the practitioner level. And I think to really kind of make that exactly what you're saying become a reality, I think it has to be kind of up and down the spectrum. And I think there'd be huge value out of it for sure.
Yeah, especially since many agencies, there are a lot of agencies that don't even have an SES program.
Yeah.
So they're not getting access to that kind of thing that's, OPM does a great job running the SES program, and they do things like that are really great. But my last 3 agencies didn't even have SES staff. They're different kind of pay scales.
And it's not even just bringing in like quote unquote private sector points of view. To me, it's really diversity of thought. I mean, we started this conversation, and you asked me where I'm from and kind of around my career. Well, where I'm from and how my career started and how it's evolved has given me a lens at which I look at a lot of different things, right? Just like yours is going to be you're one of one and I'm one of one. But you want to bring those different unique perspectives in. And that's where the value really comes from. I get so excited when I can bring other people in and at bare minimum, give me their thoughts, right? I'll ask people all the time, hey, can you red team this for me?
Yeah.
And let me know, am I tracking or am I not tracking? And that's hugely important to me. And just like an AI algorithm, right? I try to sort of teach myself based on what they bring in, right? So if I bring in that thought and their point of view, I can say, oh, well, I can save that and I can leverage that in my next set of projects. And that's how I've learned, is from other people. So I think that diversity of thought has been hugely beneficial to me. And I don't see how it's not hugely beneficial to every single organization out there.
Yeah. Agreed. Looking a long time ago, I used to look at organizations that when somebody left, they would treat them almost like a traitor. Oh, you're leaving the organization. I don't think that's so much the way it is now. I think we have a much freer view of that to say, hey, okay, great. We're celebrating you. You got a new opportunity. Maybe it's a promotion or a new role of a different type that you wanted to try out. Keep us in mind in the future if we have another opportunity and you want to loop back to us. And I think by doing that, you give people the freedom to go learn something new and then bring it back to a previous organization and say, hey, here's what I learned. And then that sharing of knowledge between companies, right? It's not like corporate secrets, especially in the IT services industry. It's not really like proprietary secrets. It's just ideas. But I think that sharing of them makes all of the organizations better.
I look at it like this. I mentioned I'm a huge soccer fan, and something that's unique to soccer that we don't have in the United States in any sport is a loan system. So my favorite team, I figured I had to find a way to bring them in. I love Aston Villa, huge Aston Villa fan, but every team in the Premier League and every team in Europe and across the world can send a player on loan. So you have these like young players that aren't ready to play for you yet on the first team, but they're too good to be on the youth team or the academy team. Can we get them more playing time somewhere instead of just letting them sit on the bench and not get better and develop? So it's not a trade. They loan that player out to another team for a year or 2 years across the. I mean, there's some that get loaned across the same league because you have teams that are really good and teams that are lesser in the same league, or different leagues, like a more like almost like if you think of baseball in the US, like they would say, well, I'm going to send this player down to AAA or AA. I'm going to let them play. It's similar to that, but to a different club altogether. And it's the same idea, right? They can go off and they can get smarter and they can develop and become a better professional, and then they might come back, right? I think there's huge value there. So that system, I think, has worked over there really well. I wish they would bring it to American sports, but definitely application within the professional world where you can go off to another agency, to another company, learn from their processes, learn what works, what doesn't work. And when you come back, you can help that organization again.
Wow, it's a great idea. I wish we could do it tomorrow, but somebody smarter than us will have to figure out how to get everybody to
like I said, I bring problems, not solutions, Jeremy. At least today.
So Brian, looking forward, what are some things that are coming up for you?
Well, I mean, you mentioned at the top of the show, right? I just joined Adobe. I'm a couple weeks in now as head of industry strategy. So, I mean, what's next for me is really trying to figure out how I can kind of work with the team at large at Adobe to drive value within the customer experience, digital experience space. This is an area, I mean, very purposely joined Adobe for multiple reasons, not the least of which is I'm very passionate around customer experience across all different spectrums and avenues that you can go down within the space. And being able to work for a company like Adobe that not only has best of breed technology, but has a platform like they do, and an innovation history like they do. I'm super excited to join, and now just trying to figure out kind of the processes, the landscape, and all of that to make sure that I can be as effective as possible in driving that change. I've made, especially with the podcast, but you'll appreciate this. It's such a small industry, right? So big and so small at the same time. And so I've made a lot of friends in this space, and being able to kind of work with them, learn more about kind of what they need and what government needs at large, and being able to just help them from the outside is something I'm really excited and passionate about to do with Adobe.
That's fantastic. Well, Brian, I want to say thank you for coming on the podcast. I think you've raised a lot of thoughts that will require some consideration, and hopefully somebody will implement some of them, and look forward to seeing how that goes for you at Adobe.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeremy. This has been great.